the vote on the sum total of a lot of work that's been going on for the past 9 months. We're going to start into our call. Next slide, please. Again, thanks for joining us today. My name is Sarah DeSilvi. I lead the Clinical Informatics Division of the Gravity Project. Due to the large number of attendees, we always mute everyone upon entry. We ask that you remain muted to avoid background noise. All of our calls are recorded, and the recording is always available on the Gravity Confluence page following the call. I really do try to address the chat throughout the call. So if you have any thoughts that you want to bring into the fold, please just send a chat to everybody, and I will include it into the conversation. We do also unmute people at times if we really want to make sure that the thoughts someone's having are included as we go forward. Even though we have question and answer periods at the end of each section, we do really try to address your questions as we go on. Next slide, please. This is our standard antitrust practices slide. Next slide, please. We always post the same links, and you can see them pop up into the chat. So if you've not already done so, we invite everyone to officially join the project. So joining the project gets you on the calendar invites and in our email lists. You can do so on the Confluence. There's a massive list of members by now. It's over 1,000 folks. So if you want to check whether you've already signed up or if others from your organization have signed up, you can review that on the Confluence as well. For all other Gravity Project information, the Confluence is where it's at. It's this massive collation of everything we've been doing over the last 2 years. Next slide, please. Very, very grateful for our growing list of project founders, grantors, and in-kind support, whether it be direct monetary donations or donation of labor. We would not be able to do our work without the collective, so thank you so much. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be going through some announcements, just talking about the project schedule and overview. We still have on here a Gravity policy update. Mark has a brief update. We tried to remove it before the call, but it didn't work. Bob's going to give a technical update from the technical side of the project. We'll then segue into our terminology vote. You'll notice here that there's a slight change to the calendar, as we sometimes do, because we were going to kick off our interpersonal domains today, but given the segue from financial insecurity into material hardship, we really thought it was probably helpful for everyone's brains to kind of wrap some details up regarding material hardship. And so we're going to spend some moment thinking about the relationship between financial insecurity and material hardship and some of the choice points we have to make to build terminology in that realm. And then we'll discuss community homework and next steps, and then we'll go home. Next slide, please. All right, announcements. We always try to make an announcement regarding seeking additional supports for our 2021 operations. We are very grateful for the support of Sync Health for our current year operations up until August. But we are, if you're interested in learning more about supporting opportunities, please send an email to gravityproject@emiadvisors.net or visit the Confluence to learn about how to become a project sponsor. Next slide, please. I do want to formally invite everyone on the call to attend our sister call, which is, so in this call, we try to address everything. It's kind of the community meeting of sorts. But there's a specific call just focusing on the Fire IG on Wednesdays, 3 to 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. You can find the HL7 meeting calendar on this link right here, and it should soon be in the chat, so you can figure out how to get to those meetings. Those meetings are led by my colleague, Bob Dieterle, who is the director of the technical division of the project. Next slide, please. Just an update here. I have an update even beyond the slide because I realized I forgot to include a key detail. We're still actively seeking letters of support for Gravity's multi-domain ICD-10-CM submission that we submitted on December 4th. You can find the current ICD-10 submission on the Confluence. It's heading for review, as far as we know, in working with our colleagues at NCHS in just about a month. On the 10th is when they review the diagnostic suggestions, and that's on the ICD-10-CM Coordination and Maintenance Committee meeting. Should you wish to submit a letter of support, you can send it directly to the committee at the email that is right there. It says to submit by the end of February. Thank you. There's a little bit of feedback there. The aim is to try to submit it by February so they can get it before the meeting. We've made a template which allows for insertion of some of your own personal thoughts regarding the importance of this work, and that's on the Gravity ICD-10 Confluence page. The point that I forgot to update is for those of you who've ever submitted to ICD-10 to NCHS for ICD-10 concepts before, you know you know that there's a little bit of bartering that can go back and forth between the committee and submitters. So we're in that phase right now where they are reviewing our submission, offering insights on how it might be adjusted to meet the requirements and readiness of the committee. What I will soon upload, I'll make sure it's there after the meeting, is one of our kind of offers back to NCHS. Again, none of this is necessarily final, but one of the suggestions that NCHS has made is that it might be time at the, this is also new, what we're doing here, that it might be appropriate to build just parent concepts, such as just a concept for housing instability or just a concept for food insecurity, and then test the need for some of those severity concepts and subdomains that we suggested in our initial submission before building everything out at this time. So that's just one of their initial thoughts, and we haven't settled on anything yet. But you can see some of our rationale in a document that I will upload to the Confluence. And again, I apologize for not putting it here. It's been quite a busy week. And Deb said a thank you. I want to thank all of you because it is a remarkable feat, that submission, and we're really looking forward to getting some of these codes into the clinical ecosystem. So thank you all. Next slide, please. So what we do, I'm just going to let everybody know. So we have a few educational pieces available in the educational and instructional materials of the Confluence for any new members. It's been nice to meet people in the world and have them have listened to the video that I made and already read some of the materials. I've been meeting and talking with a lot of people over the last few weeks, and it's been fun to have them acknowledge those videos and things that are available to the public. So they're there for you, and we encourage you to read them and listen to them. Next slide, please.
Sarah.
Hi. Yes.
Hi. What does adjudication process refer to for this video?
Oh, it's the process by which the subject matter experts take in the submissions from the community or from the literature and assess whether they are aligned with the domain or outside of the domain. And that is all explained in the video because we thought it might be helpful for people kind of to see behind the curtain, right? So it's a video that we send to any new subject matter expert to help them understand the work. And it's a video that our members have enjoyed watching just to understand how it's done, because we use our subject matter experts such as HUD for inadequate housing, right? Or, our amazing transportation subject matter experts, Alexandra King, Michael, Jennifer Sisto-Gall from Lyft and Epoch Center from UT, right? We use these subject matter experts to ensure that we're on target with the domain, because the domain of social risks in general, the ecosystem is so young, we have to basically form the shape of them aligned with the literature. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. That's a use of the concept adjudication that is not familiar, at least not to me. Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Um, Oh, so Margaret's saying earlier this week the SDOH codes were not on the tentative agenda. As far as we know, yes, they will be on the agenda for the meeting. If they're not on there now, it's just because they're still madly working. They had an incredible number of submissions for this meeting. And so we have talked to Donna Pickett directly, and the intention is that they will be heard at that meeting. Yes, even though they're not there. The public agenda on the register, because it's government based, has to go out 3 months before the meeting. So that's partly why there's a discrepancy. We wanted to announce invitations to the ONC annual meeting, March 29th through 30th. The all virtual ONC 2021 annual meeting will be held March 29th through 30th from 12 to 5 p.m. EST. Join over 1,000 health IT partners online for 2 afternoons of plenary and breakout sessions on a variety of topics. You can register at this link. All right, next slide, please. I think the link should be, oh, there it already is. This is just a link to the Siren Coffee and Sirens podcast, which I'll be doing soon with Michael Ballett on state screening approaches. And there's also a bunch of other podcasts in the series. They're really quite lovely. The inaugural one with Kristen Bibbins Domingo from UCSF was based on the Academy's paper on the activities of SDOH was quite powerful. So next slide, please. And project schedule and overview. Lucy, can you mute your?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're okay.
Of
You're
course.
Next slide, please. So this is our roadmap. It hasn't changed for the first time in a little bit, right? So you can see there's these 3 layers. There's the layer of terminology, which is the wing I lead, which is the development of the language and data that we use, these data sets. There's the technical wing, which is the wing Bob leads. There's the pilot wings, which are just kicking off. So here we are. You can see, oh, we haven't moved our little green line. We're in the middle of February. And we're just kicking off, we're finishing our the domains that carried over from 2020, and we're just kicking off Material Hardship, which was a spin-off, an independent domain from when we were considering financial insecurity and some of the screening questions that were submitted. And then intimate partner violence, social isolation, and stress. Alongside this work is the work of the technical work. There's active work with the implementation guide ballot reconciliation. I believe Bob will talk a little bit about that. There's the upcoming Connectathon. We talked about that last time. It hasn't been posted last time we know, but it should be shortly. And then we're actively considering planning for the pilots at in the summer. Again, I'm going to mention to everybody, we have a break built in this summer. This is a break for you all and not for us. This is to make sure that we finish up some of the work with the terminology divisions that we've been doing and building all of these concepts into code. There's a lot of work to do with our colleagues at Registry and SNOMED. So we hope to make sure that we have time to get that done well. Next slide, please. This is just a visual of our 2 divisions, the 2 wings, terminology and technical. It's a model in progress as we, what will be the focus of the SDOH pilots? I believe Bob might be able to talk about that. Is really testing the implementation guide and the work of the technical division. Is Bob on the call?
Yes, I am. Yes,
Hi, Bob. Are you going to cover that in your technical world, or do you want to talk about that now?
we can talk about it now.
Okay,
We're
great.
going to cover it in the technical world. The pilots that we're looking at focus on 2 different things. First is testing the implementation guide itself, making sure that we can support exchanges between providers and community-based organizations. The second portion of it is based on some work that we're doing under a cooperative agreement between ONC and HL7. And that, at least based on the proposal we submitted, they haven't approved this portion of it yet, will involve mapping to open referral from FIRE, from the work we're doing with the implementation guide, and mapping to community-based referral platforms. We're not going to pick exactly who those are at the moment, but we have certainly work that's going to be done with under our knee-high agreement, and then our Sync Health agreement. And then we're going to have some work that's done on some of the other platforms that have started to adopt Fire. So we'll test that as part of the pilots also. So the mapping work as well as the work that we'll be doing with the implementation guide. Let's see, do we have other questions here?
So Matt has a question regarding the definition of stress versus other SDOH. So you can, interestingly enough, our colleagues at UCSF kind of have the database of all stress indicators. They have this amazing collation of stress from all different angles. So certainly we've covered financial stress in our approach with financial insecurity and financial strain. There's general stress, and I'll try to find the stress measurement network and put it into the link as well. We have it as a reference. So we're basically in all of our domains, we carve out areas in social risk in the literature that we know impart risk to the humans that we care about that are not currently represented or collated. So it's basically right now the bucket is quite is quite large, but we're focusing specifically on non-financial stress because we've already covered that in our financial insecurity domain and under financial strain. So I'll send the link in there, Matt, and you can see what it looks like. You can see very clearly that there's kind of a pathway to cover specifically stress that is not assigned to financial origins. And then do we have a plan to cover childcare insecurity as an SDOH? So you can see these concepts kind of bubble to the top as we talk about material hardship later in the call. So 100% we are talking about childcare, and we're going to be trying to figure that out over the next few months. Both from can I pay for it and does it exist perspectives.
Sarah, can I ask Bob a question about the
Pilots?
Yeah, about the pilot.
Oh, yes, sorry, I went right to the answer. Yeah, go for it.
No problem. Bob, do you anticipate that there might be a category of participation called observer, where people on the call who aren't going to be testing an IG or doing other technical activities that you need can just be observing the proceedings to see how it works and see how everything that we've done goes down?
You're referring to the pilots, correct?
I'm sorry, the pilot, yeah.
Yeah, I think when we get into the pilots, we'll establish a weekly call to go over what we're doing on the pilots and the update. I think there will be focused calls on each of the pilots. I don't know that those will be subject to casual observers, but we certainly will have a coordination call that you'll be able to go and understand where we are and the work that we're doing. Would that be
Great,
reasonable?
that definitely sounds like a step in the direction I was hoping you might go. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Any other questions on the pilot or on really we're responding to the roadmap that I was talking about just before? Yes.
Hi, I would like to learn more about the pilot. Maybe at some point in life, I can take some of those details to my organization and maybe we can sponsor some of the test and pilot down the road. But very interested to learn as much as possible.
Is this Charles, our colleague
Yes.
from firm?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself.
No. I'm just going to publicly thank you again for being there last time, and we needed a colleague from the veterans world. So thank you for piping in today. And so Charles, we'll make sure to reach out to you. We definitely have your contact.
Thank you so much.
And then Brian.
Sarah and Bob, are you going to have like an open call for pilots in addition to, the sort of planned connect-a-thon kind of one?
I'm going to let Bob answer that question. I'm sorry, Bob?
That's what we're looking at, is having a open call each week on the pilots, much like we have an open call on the implementation guide as we're doing ballot reconciliation. We haven't landed all that detail yet. That's something we'll be putting together between now and the time the pilots start at the beginning of, probably at the beginning of June is current expectation. But we'll keep you informed and give you an opportunity to participate. Okay.
Julia, was that an answer to your question, friend?
It was a little, there's some clicking kind of covering a little bit of what Bob said, but I think I got the gist.
Okay, and then it looks like, so Bob, you might want to look at Brian's comment. So Brian, this is Brian Hansberg, who's a member of Technical Advisory Committee. He's talking about Project Unify. Can you read the comment?
Yeah, Project Unify the national. Okay, well, I think as we get closer to establishing the pilots, we certainly would like to have the conversation with you.
Yeah, and also Brian, as a member of our Technical Advisory Committee, we look forward to folding that knowledge in there as well.
Sure, and I'm just going to pop my email into the chat. Bob, feel free to just reach out to me.
Excellent, happy to do so.
All right, any other questions on the pilots or the roadmap? Yes, so Hasna, thank you, Hasna, you're so good. She's giving an example of transportation stress. So there's a lot of really amazing examples of stress that are covered in the stress measurement toolbox from UCSF. To whatever degree we're able, and you'll see this again as we go forward, we try to align elements of stress with the domains that that they could be attributed to when it's possible. Because certainly the first stage of food insecurity is worry about not having enough food. And so there's correlates across the different social risks. But we appreciate this comment, Hasna, always. And you can see if you dive into the stress measurement toolbox that there is a lot there. Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay, next slide, please. This is just our use cases. I'm going to move through these so we just keep on going. We've talked about these the last few times. There are some edits to be done. I still have to go back and listen to that last call. Next slide, please. Lucy, I did this for you. I updated the different domains. I added.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're
I
welcome.
always appreciate personal assistance. Thanks.
So Lucy had highlighted that our domains on this image did not correlate with the domains we developed on the roadmap. So you can see we've expanded them here. So along with elder abuse, we have intimate partner violence, social isolation and stress. And then you can see those community level domains. And I would say racism, I'm also going to say bias. We're now holding plates for other elements of experiences of inequities that are not just racially driven. And, you know, there was actually a really lovely blog written by a colleague of mine recently on minority stress. So when we're thinking about stress, it's also important to think about that element of it. His name is Dr. Chase Anderson. He's out at UCSF as well, I think. But the goal of the Gravity Project is to develop consensus-driven data standards to support use and exchange of social determinants of health data within the healthcare sectors and between the healthcare sector and other sectors. And these are the domains that we're carving out so far. And you can see as we go forward, we do leave space for the expansion. And there is some overlap, as you'll see later on. So these are all distinct circles, but as we've talked about before, for many people, these domains overlap. So we try to make sure that we're developing domains in our work that exist independently, even like that can be independent, even though at times they're interdependent. So the circles start to overlap as we talk about some of our domains in this conversation even. Next slide, please. And I just want to say one more thing regarding that consideration of domains. That work of definition is driven by the literature of health risks. It's driven by public health literature. It's driven by medical social care integration literature. So we use evidence as our guide whenever we're trying to consider things within our domain work. So this is part of what is a gravity cornerstone. Next slide, please. Oh, and so Mark, I don't know if you're on. You did not intend to give an oral update, but are you on, friend?
I am here.
We literally could not erase the row, so I passed the mic to you.
Policy triumph. Next slide, please. Thanks, Sarah. Many of you will have already heard from us on prior calls. Gravity Project did submit a group of domains to ONC for inclusion in the U.S. Core Data for Interoperability. ONC released a draft version 2 on January 12th, which we had hoped would include the social determinant data class, but did not. That doesn't delay our work. The work remains on track. The standardization, the representation in FHIR for exchange in clinical settings and getting out to community organizations, all of that's on track. None of it's delayed. But, and this is the update. The ONC's U.S. CDI task force is now meeting weekly for an hour and a half each week to consider the draft V2, including the data elements and classes that were not included in the published draft. So they will be looking, for example, at our SDOH data class, and that work is ongoing, leading up to the task force recommendations to the Health IT Advisory Committee and the National Coordinator by April 15th. So we'll keep you posted. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Mark. Okay. Next slide, please.
Good luck, Mark, lobbying all those people.
Thank you, Lucy.
He's the best person for the job. We're so grateful.
And let anyone on the call know if you think they would be helpful to you. The more the merrier, or maybe not.
Absolutely, I'm exploring that question. Thank you.
Hi, can I just ask a question? This is Rita, about one of the USCDI elements that was displayed.
Sure, go for it, Rita.
What is actually meant or intended by date of resolution?
I believe this is for, not encounters. I believe this is on the problem list, if I'm remembering correctly. And we actually had, I actually sit on the USCDI task force, and we had some discussion about what that means. That's one of the things that the task force does, is to explore in a little more detail what's meant. I don't believe there's been closure on that question yet. So your question is actually a task force question as well.
Oh, how about that? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Mark from the policy angle? Okay, I do want to mention that I dropped my colleague, Dr. Anderson's piece in there. I will try not to only draw, and I also put the stress measurement link in as well. All right, next slide. Bob, passing the mic to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. Next slide, please. We did, this may be a bit redundant with things you know from the past. We did submit the implementation guide for ballot for the January ballot cycle. It does include support for assessments, health concerns and problems, goals, referrals, consent, and aggregation for reporting. The ballot ended in January 18th. If you go to the next slide, we had 63 affirmative votes, 30 negative votes, 56 abstentions, 43 that did not vote out of the 192 that signed up. We have already met the 60% requirement to publish a standard for trial use. So we are not reliant on anyone withdrawing negatives to move forward, assuming there are no other blockers. Out of the voting, there were 225 ballot comments. 72 were negative comments, 153 were what are called affirmative comments. Those are comments that are related to suggestions, comments, typos, and questions. So we're going to have to go through during the next couple of months and answer all 225. At the moment, I think we covered about 54 of those. So we will try to get through probably a good 20 to 25 a week, just so that we can cover them all. They'll fall into two broad categories. Those where we feel the answer is obvious to the comment, and we don't intend to wind up discussing them on our Wednesday call. We'll just put them into what's called a block vote. Anyone can go and look at how we resolve those comments, and if they're not happy with it, they can pull them for additional conversation. If not, we will vote them on the patient care call a week from the time we put them out for review, post them to the listserv for patient care. And at that point, if it's not pulled, we'll block vote them and basically approve them all. The goal is to get through them all over the next couple of months and be able to apply those updates. So if you're interested in the ones we believe need to have discussion or review, come and join us on the Wednesday calls that Sarah announced earlier. Next slide, please. So this is our schedule. Sarah went through it earlier. We're in the middle of ballot reconciliation, and we're working on creating the reference implementation. We had part of that available for the Connectathon in January. We're continuing to evolve it. We'll have a completed reference implementation available for the Connectathon in May. And then based on the feedback that we get from that Connectathon and the work we've done on ballot reconciliation, we'll complete the update to the ballot, or to the implementation guide, and plan on publishing it. We should be publishing it right about the time we start the pilots. Lucy had asked a question earlier, the difference between a Connectathon and a pilot. A Connectathon is where we test specific things related to the implementation guide. It's all done with no PHI. It's all done in a public forum where we're working with other implementers and other implementation guides based on HL7's schedule. The pilots themselves, the intent is to actually go and put the implementation guide into production using real PHI. So communicating real referrals, communicating feedback on what was accomplished on those referrals, being able to go in and have a recording and an EHR of the outcomes of assessments. So it's really implementing these and understanding where we have issues that when you get to implementation, we now have to deal with, or maybe if we've solved them, we can feel comfortable trying to scale it up and move forward. It's really our rubber meets the road opportunity here. Lucy, did that answer your question?
Yes, I just put in the chat. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Bob, does the STU include consensus STU DEs? Oh, we have created a supplemental guide that will wind up taking the value sets that have been established through Sarah's work and the community's work and making them available to implementers. We're working on some formalization of that by looking at how we can have what we're calling dynamic value sets, but that's work that will be ongoing. So the bottom line is yes, they will be available for the pilots. And they will be available for anyone that wishes to implement the implementation guide, whether they're a pilot or not. Next slide, please. This is the work we did at the Connectathon and the work that the reference implementation is doing. The blue lines are the interactions that we're dealing with between a provider organization and a community-based referral organization or a community-based organization directly. We show on here a responsible payer as a way to test the idea of aggregation, meaning these are the patients that all have a common characteristic, a cohort, and making that data available. We test it by working on the with a responsible payer as the grouper. But that also could be a public health organization. It could be the CBRO insured patients. It could be anyone else that has a need to know and a right to know. The one arrow on here that we need to turn blue is the purple one going up to the SDOH survey. That's also part of the reference implementation. Next slide, please. This is information that I believe we've already shared with you on the Connectathon. I will not go through it. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So what are we doing next? We're engaging with NLM and Reagan Street and other stakeholders to advance the tooling to support the multiple domains. We're continuing to engage with the community to establish the clinical content required for these domains. That's the work that Sarah is doing. We're continuing to advance the development of the reference implementation, which we just talked about. And we are going through the process of responding to the ballot comments. And again, please come join us. Next slide, please. And this is really an overview of the reference implementation and what's included in here. We do have a link to the wireframes and the code that was developed for the January Connectathon, and the basically the reference implementation itself. So there are links out there if you want to use them. Next slide, please. Okay, any final questions?
So Bob, it looks like Brian was just bringing in again some of the work from Project Unify at 4:25 in the chat. I just want to make sure it's called to light that again as an outgrowth of the National Action for Social Determinants of Health and for Social Determinants and Health Equity. They have a demo that you can find in the YouTube link regarding utilizing Prepare and then utilizing FAR subscriptions from the EHR to social service referral case management system, and then autofilling WIC.
Excellent. Okay. So thank you very much. I think we've taken a look at that, but we'll continue to go and work with Project Unify and others to make sure that we are creating standards that we can all adopt and for exchanging SDOH data.
There's also our colleague Greg has a question here, which you're probably best to look at as well.
And I can also just talk. I mean, this is exciting progress. I'm working with several different communities that are trying to figure this out. And there's a range of stakeholders whose perspectives might be valuable, but they're not necessarily technology developers. And so I wonder how you would kind of roles community-based stakeholders could play in a Connectathon, if any, and how might they prepare with a little bit of advance notice to play those roles? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, good question, Greg. There will be, the next Connectathon is in May. It will be on the, primarily on the UK time frame, which means we'll be starting very early in the morning and continuing to very early afternoon. That's how HL7 does it. They move the base for the Connectathon and for the working group meeting to various organizations, HL7 organizations around the world. So what we'll do is over the next month or so, maybe a month and a half, we'll start to frame out what we're going to do for the May Connectathon. And it is always possible to act as a observer. And it's also possible to act in the role of advising us on things that we should be looking at as part of the Connectathon. So in other words, getting on the calls, we'll have special topics we go through related to assessment or to types of exchanges or additional functionality we need to add in future versions of the implementation guide. And I think they can participate there whether they're highly technical or not. Does that answer your question?
Sure, and the suggestions for points of contact at which people should participate, will just stay tuned on these calls for more?
Absolutely. Okay, anything else? I think that covers it. So Sarah, back to you.
All right, back to me, here we go. Terminology. Next slide, please. So here we are at we bumped it just by 2 weeks, but by now we hope you're well accustomed to the consensus data sets for the final details for inadequate housing, including goals that we dropped in some program additions, our transportation insecurity data set, our financial insecurity data set, which has been spliced independently from material hardship as that was deemed as necessary because not all material hardship is financially driven. And then we have our demographic data sets of education and veteran status and unemployment. So we'll be voting on those today. Some of those have been in the hopper for many, many months, so we're very grateful. And then in the latter half of the call, we'll be talking specifically about looking forward into material hardship. So for this next phase of work, it's expected to last the next 3 months. So usually we spend about 3.5 months on domains. And so we'll be focusing on material hardship and again, those interpersonal domains for the next months. Just want to highlight, given kind of the need, what our recognized need to develop some standards regarding goals and interventions, we are focusing specifically on screening and diagnoses at this time on the domains going forward. So you'll recognize some of the domains that we're voting on today are comprehensive and some of them are just screening and diagnoses. But for the next set of work, we're really focusing on the screening and diagnoses as we recognize really a host of work specifically in the intervention space to make sure we're doing well there. Next slide, please. Here we go, multi-domain consensus voting. Next slide. Just going to remind individuals regarding what voting means. So we took some feedback from our colleagues and friends, and we have a voting period that we'll be announcing very shortly, which will last through after the call today. And so it's important to know the following parameters, like what a vote means, and this is all detailed in the Google Drive, the Google survey that you'll be taken to when you start your vote. So a yes vote does not necessarily mean that the deliverable is the ideal one from the perspective of the committed member, but that it's better to move forward than block the deliverable. Yes with a comment is if a consensus process attracts significant comments. So yes with comment votes is expected the comments will be addressed in future revisions of the deliverable. So if you have a comment on any of the data sets that you feel like is important to consider, just email it to us. We do hope that through our extensive end-to-end review comment process, we've addressed most comments prior to the vote. But again, if there's a critical mass of comments that need to be resolved, we will resolve them. A formal objection is this vote must include comments. It's mandatory because we need to figure out how to address your concerns, and that has to include a path to address these objection. So a formal objection without vote without a comment is just considered an abstaining vote. Again, you email your comments to the Gravity Project by the 25th of February. We do, there's a little bit, I'm pie in the sky. So I was talking about unanimous approval at an earlier meeting. It really is a majority. So we look to have a majority of our members develop as represented by a quorum at this call to vote in favor of the deliverables. So that's what we'll be hoping for. And you are always welcome to abstain. All right, next slide.
Sarah?
Hi, yes.
A majority of the people on this call, is that how you're defining a majority?
For right now, that is the way we're defining the majority. We've invited, there will be people participating via the link after the call. Like we spent a specific focus out to our executive committees as well to get them to come. The reason being is that we are kind of in a membership predicament, and we're going to be thinking about this over time. So we have such an enthusiastic membership of 1,000+ folks. We can't develop a quorum from that group. And so we either have, and we have rolling domains. So it's not as if we're focusing just on one domain at a time like we did with food insecurity. And we do not wish to purge people, even though we might have to do considerations of kind of like reattestations of intention to stay a member at some time. But for right now, just from an equity standpoint, we decided to work off the quorum of those individuals who were out on the call. And this is the same thing we did for the last vote. So you're engaged, you're here, you're present, we've announced the vote. So that's the way we're doing it right now. Understanding the complexity of our massive our massive group and the desire not to disenfranchise. So that's the approach we have right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Could I request, as long as I have the mic open, all of these links for the master lists? Could you please email these links to everyone on this call?
Our distribution list is in order to vote, we're hoping that you can right now click them and save them into your browsers, right? Because this is the intent. The hope is by having all of these links live in the chat, you can click on them and open them in a browser.
Yes, I know how to do that. It's so inefficient, and somebody is doing this in a nice list, so I thought I could ask for that in an email, because it's not easy to find these things on the Confluence site, as some people here already know.
Yes. So
okay, one by one. All right, thanks.
I'm so sorry. So, and again, I'm just going to say publicly that we really do hope to make sure that we are responsive to the needs of our community. And if you specifically wish us to send them to you directly in spreadsheets, we will always do that. If you ping us, if you know a vote's coming up and you say, please send me the lists, we will happily do so. And I'm sorry that the Confluence remains complicated. We are definitely working on revising it, and Lucy's actually a key part of that, so we're grateful. The Google poll, I believe, is the first link, right? And then the transport. So if you click on that, that takes you to the survey, and then the other links are each of the individual masters just to review. Any questions regarding this process? Again, this is a process in evolution. And again, it's trying, because last time that we did this, we had the vote internal to the call, and it was quite complicated. So we tried to do this external to the call via Google survey in order to make it easier for you. Any other questions?
Sarah, it's a question/comment. Active service member, many of the listed domains I recognize may not applicable for active service member except one, financial insecurity. Some active service member and their family may have financial insecurity a check. So how do we handle this piece?
You mean if you're answering from a firm perspective, is that what you mean?
No, from a standard perspective, like how do we include this standard saying it just applicable only on active service member? The rest could be applicable in veterans, right? We have two populations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's actually probably a consideration for, I think that's a great call. That's a great consideration for you and our firm colleagues and our VA colleagues. Maybe we can have a specific call regarding that matter.
Yes, please. Do you mind? We don't want to leave them out.
Yeah, no, we absolutely do not want to leave them out. So Matt saying clicking on the Confluence pages above is prompting me to log on to Confluence. That is not an expected, again, so you usually log into Confluence only if you're trying to make a comment on the page. Carrie, can you unmute yourself and maybe assist with some of the technical issues?
Sure.
Okay.
So when you're clicking on the link, you're getting a login, a request for a login.
Oh yeah, so Julie Dooling is actually answering us. So they appear on the Google survey as well. So they're independent, and they probably take you to the Confluence. But if you follow the Google survey on the first link, I forgot they take you directly to the master lists and to the vote. The ballot is the first link. And how about this? What we'll do
Sarah?
is, yes?
Are we voting only on the diagnoses, or are we voting on all tabs on each master list?
You're voting on everything that is included in this set, which includes updates from inadequate housing, comprehensive screening, diagnoses, goal setting, and interventions for transportation insecurity and financial insecurity, and then the screening and diagnoses only for education, unemployment, and veteran status.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And it sounds like, given the complexity of things, it might be helpful to give individuals a little more time after the call to vote. Does that seem like a good idea?
By the way, Sarah, this is Brian. I just wanted to let you know that in clicking through the links in the chat, the consensus voting Google poll is working fine, as are all of the master lists except for the transportation domain. That forces you to log in.
Well, Confluence is such a joy. So, but I believe you can get to it from the Google survey. Is that true? Yeah, I think you should be able to get to it if you click the Google survey version of it. So, Terry and everybody, let's agree to extend the voting time by additional 2 hours till 8 o'clock.
Okay.
You are
Okay.
correct. From the Google survey, it works.
And I'm so sorry. We do try to, I am always logged into Confluence, so I am a bad tester. All right, so we're extending the voting just to allow for the completion of the sets, and we look forward to your votes. And again, we do look forward to trying to consider the process. We're loath to do gleaning, but we do need to try to figure out how to do our quorums, and thank you for coming and participating in the vote. So extending the vote until 8 o'clock to allow for the complexities. Corey's asking about, okay, is it okay to segue? Any other questions on resolving any of our technical issues on the vote? It sounds like no. Is everybody busy voting? We'll do a survey regarding the voting process as well in an email, just to try to make sure we get feedback. We do care about feedback.
Sarah, could you or somebody put the Google poll link in the chat again?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Carrie, could you assist with that? I'm sorry, I'm like all over. I
Yes.
think it's just, you're lovely. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to answer some of the questions. Thank you, Carrie. So it sounds like some of the technical issues have been resolved. The Google poll is posted again. We're extending the voting just a bit to allow for the just for enough time after this meeting to review and vote. And again, these have not changed since they've been on the Confluence for a little bit. So we are trying to improve the Confluence as well. Corey's asking if any additional work's been done on the use cases since Gravity kicked off. There is a need to work on use cases and patient stories across all of our past and future work. So you can expect actually a thread of considerations regarding use cases and patient stories as we go forward into these next months of labor. We had not focused on them. We have been asking our colleagues in the domains of intimate partner violence and social isolation to assist with expansion of the patient stories and considerations of use cases, because of knowing we're heading into domains that weren't covered by our original patient story. So there's lots to come on that. Corey, was that a sufficient answer?
Yes, Sarah, thank you. I think in addition to more use cases, I think also getting a sense from community members on sort of the relative priority of those use cases might also help drive the work forward.
And I think maybe we can integrate that kind of assessment into some of our community outreach we're doing with some of our other initiatives. All right. Okay, I have a brief update heading into our next bit if we feel like we're ready to segue. Are we ready to segue? What's the pulse? Voting's extended. It sounds like technical issues are addressed. Work in progress. It seems like it's better than the internal poll, though. that was hard. All right. At least you can save it and come back later. All right, I'm going to take us down a quick journey for material hardship if we have bandwidth for this. Are we ready to go? Okay. Thanks, friends. Okay, again, thank you for voting. We look forward to collating your votes. Any significant comments and consensus we'll bring back to the group, and all comments are addressed and resolved as we work back with the voting member. Next slide, please. All right, next slide. And again, I'm going to make a survey regarding voting process to see if we can always try to build a better mousetrap here. So next slide, please. I just wanted to take us into a brief discussion, as I mentioned, regarding some of the considerations that came up with material hardship, and to kind of identify for the community some of the directions we have to consider and the problems we have to consider as we go forward. I just wanted to remind everybody what we mean when we say identify. On the previous slide, you saw the different stages of work that we do. We've been doing end-to-end review for so long that I wanted to remind everybody that there's an identify phase. And for the next domains, you're going to see that we're in the identify phase for at least a couple weeks. Identify is a stage defined by our collaborative engagement to ensure we define what data is required and how to place it within the logical constraints of the evidence and taxonomies. So we take all of the ideas, right, and we facilitate idea making, and then we try to figure out how it's placed. And sometimes I call this work ordering the sea, because there's not very much structure out there, and we have to make it aligned with the evidence we have on hand. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to remind everybody the definitions we came up with for financial insecurity and material hardship, and discuss why we've taken the tack we've taken so far and some of the things we have to think about as we go forward. So financial insecurity was the state of being wherein a person has difficulty fully meeting current or ongoing financial obligations or does not feel secure in their financial future. Material hardship, related but distinct, is the lack of specific socially perceived basic physical necessities. So as you might remember, we initially started to consider just financial strain as a domain, and then our SMEs asked us to consider financial insecurity, which encompassed concepts of like debt and bankruptcy. And then they also asked us to consider material hardship, which is when the individual literally does not have specific social needs. Next slide, please. You can see I abandoned the problematic model that showed us that evolution. And so this is just an initial Venn diagram that basically shows how financial insecurity and material hardship overlay. So some material hardship is financially driven and some is not. This is why there is that overlap. Right? So we have to cover for cases that include assessment of income being the driver, and we have to cover for cases where it's not. And we have to consider all kinds of things as we Oh, thanks, Mark. You sent me a link. The things like that in private chats are often quite funny. People are like trying to make me laugh as I'm talking. All right, next slide, please. Well, you can see that subtypes are unable to get childcare, etc. So this is kind of what I feel like I've wanted to very, very clearly state for the community, because it really reflects things that we hear every time we talk about this concern, right? So in some sense, you know, if we can consider many of the domains that we talk about along the financial insecurity and material hardship spectrum. So you could imagine financially driven food insecurity. So on this, underneath the yellow line, is you can see the yellow line covers financial insecurity all the way to where financial insecurity and material hardship overlap, which is when the reason why a person does not have the thing is because they do not have the financial means to do it, right? To get it. So financially driven food insecurity is on that spectrum, going from worry all the way to not having it, housing instability and homelessness, transportation insecurity that is financially driven. But you can remember some of the concepts that we had within our transportation insecurity work were not all financially driven. And then inability to obtain utilities, like it's another example. This is by far not comprehensive, right? But if I'm not able to pay my phone bill or my internet bill or my heat bill or my electricity bill, right? That would be financial insecurity, utility access, right? And the pink arrow underneath there, you can imagine when the hardship is not driven by financial needs per se, or at least directly. And we can say in, you know, first world countries, money can solve most everything. I hear that a lot, but that's actually not true, because there really are still some barriers that money can't compensate for that are very significant in the inequities that we see in the experiences of the people we care for. So food insecurity driven by famine or disaster, what's happening in Houston right now, you know, it's not food insecurity, but it's definitely a water problem and heating problem. There's a lot going on right there. Transportation insecurity driven by rural issues or access issues. The concepts of digital inequity that we've seen so prevalently across rural spaces, specifically in rural telemedicine and rural health, like the inability to access patients because there's just not a means of internet to find them. And so having to use things like phones, et cetera. And sometimes they don't even have phones because there's no cell service and they don't have a phone line. And then lack of childcare resources. So this is when it's not that you can't afford childcare, it's just that there's literally none available in your area. So we did this just because we tend to have this conversation every time, and it certainly came up when we presented to the executive committee. So these are the ways you can imagine not all material hardship is driven by financial concerns. And you can imagine some of the domains we've talked about before, in part, again, not comprehensively, in part being within this spectrum of financial insecurity to material hardship. I hope that's a better way to represent the complexity. And now there's a bunch of things to consider going forward. So next slide, please. So one of the things that we think about, again, specifically with material hardship, because that's our work going forward, again, it's the lack of specific socially perceived basic physical necessities. Again, it's generally caused by limited financial resources, specifically in the US, right? But it's also caused by lack of availability in the environment. And I am a rural family practice provider. This is my daily beat. Again, internet, the example, financial because they kind of cannot afford it, rural because it's just not there. The reason why this becomes important is from an interventions perspective, the interventions are very different, right? And we've talked about before that maybe these the material hardship not there is best suited to more of a neighborhood or environmental level concern rather than a personal concern. But this is part of what we have to parse out as we go forward, because specifically we've been asked to consider issues of utilities and internet in order to respond to this moment in time, specifically with the pandemic when we're so dependent upon it. Oh yeah, so I believe, Lucy, I believe you brought that, yeah, and then Hasna, you had that lovely story regarding clothing before as well. So we will have to think about the domains that we include in here, and I believe, you know, caregiver and support is something to consider. We do have our subject matter experts to guide us. Michelle's gesture saying, let's not just limit the concept of access to rural areas as many businesses. Yes, exactly. So yeah, so sorry. I speak from my bias, but Michelle is correctly saying that these issues are not issues just of the rural settings, and certainly urban inequities regarding access are very, very critical and well known. So how do you foresee handling material hardship issues with domains that have already been addressed, for example, food deserts? So we actually haven't addressed food deserts yet and food access. That's planned to be addressed in the fall. And so, Tom, this is part of what we're going to be working on going forward. And again, the reason why I said identify as well, we have really good colleagues that help us figure out the implications of the sorting that we do in our work when it comes to the taxonomies we're building in, whether it be SNOMED or ICD-10-CM. So in some sense, we have to drive the order we feel like is best. And in some senses, we also have to work within the orders that are already there. So expect to have this be the conversation that carries out over the next few months. And there's all kinds of different other ways it's going to play out. And we have to just try to do as best we can because it's definitely complicated. Hassan, yes, Hassan, you're so good at this. Yeah, essential needs of the home. And again, does the interventions perspective make sense? Because you could leave it unpacked and not give an origin, but then your interventions would be off. It's really, so it may become important. This is actually explicated in the next slide. So next slide, please. So I just want to detail how this, how we basically came to where we are and some of the considerations we have going forward. Again, you've heard me reference, our colleagues at NAC and Prepare very often. It's such a widely disseminated tool and it's so helpful, it's hard to not. So in Prepare, they have a really important material security question, but it doesn't reference the origin of the cause. So it could be either financial, it could be otherwise. So in the past year, have you or any of your family members that have been unable to get any of the following when it's really needed? And this is really keeping with the spirit of Prepare, which is the really rapid identification of needs. And then with further questions, you can get to the origin, et cetera. But some of our questions regarding regarding material hardship really focus specifically on financial drivers, like health leads. In the past 12 months, has the electricity, gas, oil, or water company threatened to shut off services in your home? Or do you have trouble paying for your gas, electricity, or bills, right? So these are some of the considerations. Again, this is the identify phase. This is the kickoff to try to focus this. We're not looking for a ton of answers right now. Well, maybe we could, maybe if someone wants to come up with the solution and solve it for us, that'd be fantastic. But this is some of the considerations we have to think of as we work in this domain. So next slide, please. So you can see, so these are just some critical questions that I'm actually just starting to collate as we navigate this space. And we can collate these questions together. So really what would be helpful as we kind of consider and wrap up this section of the meeting is really analyzing the questions that we have to bring to our subject matter experts and our community and ourselves to really make sure that we get this right. So we want to consider how to address different causes in our terminology. So one of the things we were proposing in December was saying the origin in the terminology. So unable to obtain utilities secondary to limited financial resources, or unable to obtain utilities secondary to lack of resource and environment, right? And so we could very clearly specify the end result. So have like a meta unable to get unspecified, and then have specified codes that include why, if we decide that that's necessary. And then this message, and then another thing we have to think about is how does this mesh with the boundaries of the taxonomies? And my friends Linda Hyde, who's our expert terminologist, and Monique Van Berkom from the AMA are so helpful in this. We do lots of, does this go here? Does this go there? What has to change for us to build this language into the taxonomies we're bound in? This becomes, it's kind of rudimentary in ICD-10-CM, but it becomes very apropos in the work of SNOMED CT. And then how do we address different screening approaches and how they map to domain outcomes, right? So we really want to be inclusive. And so we just want to make sure that we're figuring out, as we have with other domains, what screening methodologies we have to have in here. And because this is the identify phase, I really want to encourage individuals to look again at the tools they're using in their communities and make sure that material hardship questions are submitted at this time, right? So my thought is that maybe since we were focusing just on financial insecurity earlier, and the material hardship was an unintended consequence, really, that we do not have a fair representation of utility inequity, digital inequity, childcare concerns, and some of the many other elements that are so critical in order to address this domain well. So I encourage you all to submit those concepts. As per usual, you can download the Excel spreadsheet from the domain page on the Confluence. You also can just email ideas to myself or Linda or gravity@emi.advisors.net. And then, so this, I really want to try to see if we can think again really critically about whether or not our screening questions and answers are complete. And then really just ask a basis question: is causality important to focus intervention? So we could leave a kind of like meta, undefined, but like unable to obtain utilities, but we wouldn't necessarily differentiate if it's unable to because you cannot pay, which could just be connecting with utility energy assistance from the state versus unable to have it because it's not there. So these are just things we need to consider as we go forward. And then Julia, please give comments. And then Corey is asking another use case question: do we wish to solve the problem of documenting the clinical data and interventions for analysis purposes first, or do we want to create codes with enough detail to reimburse social providers for the work? I think the terminology work to address these use cases may overlap, but they also may be different. And if we choose to solve one of these problems first, would that help us move forward more efficiently and effectively? Corey, that's a brilliant idea. So I wonder.
So Sarah, I'll just make three. I don't have any of the answers to that, right? I do like what you said, to create a way of post-coordinating the concepts so that we could break down different representations of them in a consistent way to make maps, right? Because when you look at some of the financial hardship kind of things in the ballot items right now, for example, you'd see like there's obviously a direct relationship between financial hardship for some things and material hardship.
Heck yeah.
And I think if we're not thinking of the use case and how a patient might interpret these questions, that we might get that wrong. So for example, if you go back a slide, the prepare question asks, for any reason, are you unable to get something? But if you have trouble paying for your gas or electricity bills, you could answer either yes or no to prepare in regards to utilities. Because if you have a program that pays for that for you, but you can't pay for it, you aren't unable to get it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But if you still couldn't pay for it, and maybe you can't get it for that reason, or maybe you can't get it for another reason, like, you live in Puerto Rico and they're not offering utilities this year or something. So, that was kind of to flip, but, there are other reasons. So I think to break down the components of those so that we could map them is really important. And it may require some rejiggering of the ways that some of the things that have already been outlined would end up, being related to one another, but I think that would be worth it. And it certainly should be done now as opposed to later.
Julie, those are all, so we have some really I love those thoughts. And then we have some, so Lisa, we said we really need to think about the end users who will assess and document. We can't make these too complex, and then there's a tendency to not complete the assessment. So part of it is that these are already things that are in the ecosystem and being used, right? So, and then I agree, right? 100%. I do this every day as a clinician. I do want to state that part of our work is to really, and I actually really appreciate NCHS saying what is absolutely necessary when it comes to ICT. But part of our job too is to just not create an excessive cacophony of things that isn't helpful. So Lucy, I just really appreciate that comment. We do, and again, this is partly why I raised that question regarding whether specifying things in pre-coordinated is more helpful or whether it's more helpful to leave them super simple. And I guess if there's, I guess I think we can discover this together, and I think we're learning as we go along as well, especially as we get farther and farther away from domains that have more structure. Like a lot of this was hard-coded for us when we were doing food insecurity because it's the most kind of sophisticated of the domains. But as we get further and further along into younger domains along the pathway, I think we have to think about this a little bit possibly more simply and more efficiently. Lisa, did that answer your question? Or your comment? Did it include it enough? And Doug's echoing it. Okay, and then, so next slide, please. Okay, so that was if you have other questions to consider regarding material hardship, that'd be great. So we're gonna keep on, so my next slide, I think we're going now directly into questions and then the homework. Okay, so you can see what our task is regarding, we're not gonna cover goals quite yet. You can see that our task for the next chunk of time is to consider the implications of parsing out material hardship and how to cover those critical concepts well. I've raised some questions. If you want to email me and have a chat regarding any of these concepts we've raised today after the call, I'm 100% here. I love one-on-one chats, even though sometimes it takes me a little bit to respond to an email. We also are starting to kick off, as we just talked about next time, some of the interpersonal domains. And again, this is just from a screening, questions and answers, and diagnoses perspective. I'm going to push through the goals bit. Next slide, and because we do want to give people time. Next,
Sarah?
Hi, yes, Lucy?
Yeah, I may be having more trouble than other people getting my mind around the concept of material hardship. I'm thinking about the evidentiary base for anything that we're talking about with respect to material hardship.
Mm-hmm.
How does this or that type of material hardship actually affect my health status?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm wondering whether that's all obvious, whether everything that you've talked about does have an evidentiary base that you haven't referred to necessarily. But this is the first domain, from my point of view as a consumer, where so many things could be at issue. Like, I don't have an electrical plug in my apartment building for a new electric car, and my state decrees that there aren't going to be any more gas stations in 3 years. This is causing me a lot of stress. I mean, there's no way that a health provider can address that. But that's a material hardship. I don't have an electrical outlet in the apartment house for plugging in my electric car. So I guess I'm wondering if we can constantly try to touch base with what is the evidence that this affects my health status? Because there are lots of things that I could be worried about that don't affect my health status, or at least there's no evidence that it does. I can proclaim that it does, but that doesn't mean that anyone else believes it.
So, so Lucy, so I must admit I neglected to put my classic Sarah DeSilvi evidence and references when we do a kickoff today. Material hardship is an odd kickoff because it was something we didn't intend to do, but we realized it was missing. Everything we've stated so far, whether it be inability to access utilities or childcare or internet. I mean, there is literature. The reason why it's in our list is because the literature demands it to be so. And
okay.
If I may, Sarah, do you mind if I can comment on the question?
Oh yeah, that sounds great.
So I have done many studies using social determinant of health since 2016 on the active service member and National Guards. So here is, even though the provider may not directly intervene on this particular assessment as you at the point of care, but from a global health, from a community health perspective, county and state level, hopefully this data that is going to get standardized and collected over time when the states see kind of a deviation in health due to transportation or lack of electricity, and maybe your problem is not an individual problem, it's a global problem in a particular area or particular segment, that's where the state need to learn about it, and that's where public policy is meaningful. It may take time, but lack of data may prohibit this, not to look at it.
Charles, I'm so glad you bring this up, because it's obvious that a lot of material hardship could point to a need for policy intervention. There's no question about that. So to go from the EHR, which is going to someday have a number on it or a code that registered some material hardship for which there is no intervention except policy advocacy, that's incredible. And to do population health in the long run, we all need a database like that. I just want to be clear that if that's a direction that we're going in, we haven't gone there before with our other domains. And I think that really captures why I'm trying to get my head around this domain, because my scattershot thinking about it points to policy intervention almost constantly. So if we're clear that that's what we want to do for long-term population health intervention at policy level, fantastic. Let's just be clear that that's what we're doing.
So Lucy, this actually reminds me that was what you brought up regarding the use cases, because we often talk in Gravity that there's two different things we say. So first of all, we can identify many of the problems that we're talking about in clinical settings, but they're solved in community settings, and then we also, often harken back to the solutions are most the true solutions are structural, right? So if I neglect to speak to the power of the language you're developing to inform policy, I apologize, because certainly we talked at great length about it regarding food insecurity, expansion of SNAP, how do you respond acutely to a pandemic increase in food insecurity prevalence in a state, right? There are some states that did really good surveys, there's some that did not, right? The Census Pulse survey was attempting. So we do consider, especially as we go into those neighborhood and community and environmental domains, that the only solutions really are structural, certainly. Lucy, I really am grateful that you identified the need and Charles identified the answer there. Cool.
So can we agree that when you say structural and I say policy, we're talking about the same thing?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just talking about.
All right.
I'm just talking about policy because as a clinician, policy has.
And policy is one arm of the intervention. It could be other interventions too, the actual interventions of visiting the problem, providing education in case of eating habits and stuff like this, different domains. So policy is one way. Over.
Yeah, but the general thought is though that some of these solutions are not happening in the clinical encounter, right?
Right.
We can't. I always reference the World Health Organization conceptual framework for action on the social determinants of health. It's like my anchor. Yeah. My favorite paper.
Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely, social determinant of health is. Hopefully, we are mature in social determinant of health in a way that that we avoid the point of care, because if you get into the point of care because something gap in social determinant of health, you are losing the mark. It's too late.
Yeah, it's a failure. Somebody showing up in the healthcare system is a failure.
Right. So over time, hopefully we increase in the prevention by collecting the data and doing the right cycle.
Yay. Here's my favorite paper for you all. Okay. Okay, friends. Okay, next. What a lovely conversation. So Hasna had more lovely examples. Hasna, you're a fount. We are so grateful for you. And then Tom had a comment. Yeah, so Tom, those elements are, you know, I think defining what we mean by necessities, perceived necessities, I think is part of the work of entering material hardship. And I'm not going to say it's easy, but neighborhood safety and green spaces and all of those elements we had projected to be part of our work in the fall. And then, yeah, so Tom, some of those in a neighborhood with poor air quality and individual intervention would be assisting them in securing adequate housing in a better neighborhood. Yes. And then Hassan saying, you're welcome. That was a big sigh. Okay. Next slide to take us to our homework. So most important homework.
Thanks,
is,
Sarah, for that
yes.
long distraction.
Yes, no, it was not a distraction. There's never distractions. This is it's the eyes on the prize, right? So sorry, we're getting through the goals work because I really want to focus on the homework so we have time. Sorry, thank you. Next slide. Okay. Oh, you know, this is oh, sorry, this was not updated. We had some email issues today and there was an updated homework slide that's not on here. The most important homework is voting, right? And so we hope to do that between now and 8 o'clock EST. The next one is start submitting. Submit concepts for screening, questions and answers, and diagnoses for material hardship. Consider whether or not there's specific questions identifying concepts of digital inequity and utility and security that have been missed in our sweep for financial strain. Submit screening questions and answers for the interpersonal domains we have in our ticket. You know, the stress measurement network that I posted earlier is a fount. Oh my Lord. So we'll be pulling from there. But also, so for their stress, intimate partner violence, elder abuse, and social isolation. Again, this is our work for the next 3 months together. And then Matt has a comment. It's not just structural right. It can, yes. If a local hospital closes down, a person cannot get to a doctor's office, then telehealth may be the example. That is something the provider can address. Yes, absolutely. So when it comes to, we were talking about health access on the last call. So one of the callers was asking about healthcare access and healthcare equity. Yes, and we actually even brought up the Flexner report, I think, because I was having a moment, and the sad death of rural hospitals in the South, specifically. And then will legal issues be a consideration? Ruth, write me what you mean, and then I think that sounds like a lovely idea. Again, we do try to we work specifically off of you know, the IOM report and the National Academy of Medicine reports. And so if there's an idea, I would love to know it. I think we're at time. Any other questions? Thank you, friends. If there's no more questions.
Thanks, Sarah.
It was another good call. Don't forget to vote.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.